Joining me now, Gregg, Jarrett, Fox News legal analyst, Kerri Urbahn, Fox News legal editor. Thanks to both of you. Kerri, give me a whack at this thing. Are more going to be able to be deported despite this judge, or what? What's your thinking here?
Larry, I loved your riff because everyone's asking, well, what authority does the president have? And the real question that people should be asking is, what authority does the judge have to interfere in the president's execution of foreign policy? There was a filing over the weekend that I think most people missed, and it was from a career official at the State Department who's been working with Venezuela and El Salvador since the early 1970s. So he's an expert. He's not a political appointee. He's a longtime State Department guy. And he made the argument that the Trump administration should be allowed to deport the Venezuelans in this way, remove them via this plane, because it was the culmination of weeks of negotiation between Secretary Rubio and other officials with the governments of Venezuela and El Salvador. And he said, if this judge is able to sweep all of that off the table, why would foreign leaders in general be able to trust and believe the Trump administration when they're negotiating and making, assurances of things? They're not going to be able to. So it's going to impact the president's ability to conduct matters of foreign policy overall, not just with respect to this situation.
So just to follow up quickly, that foreign countries should be discussing foreign policy with either this federal judge or any federal judge. The president's not important, right?
Well, that's exactly right. What's the point of having elections if judges are just going to come in and say, you know what, we're going to take over Article 2 powers and make decisions pertaining to immigration, national security, and foreign policy? That is not the role of the judicial branch. And so I'm hoping, Larry, that this spurs on the Supreme Court to get involved in one of these presidential power cases, because this just can't go on. I mean, again, it really usurps the democratic process, and it's going to make it impossible for President Trump, who was elected by the people, to get anything on his agenda done. So,
Gregg, Jarrett, you can, have a shot at what Kerri's saying. I think it's eminently sensible. Yeah, she's got to be right. But what about this other business? This is from this wonderful New York Sun article, actually editorial. I'm going to guess it was written by Seth Lipsky, who writes almost all their editorials. This burden of proof and standard of proof. In matters involving immigration benefits, the applicant always has the burden of proof. The applicant has the burden of proof that he or she is eligible to receive the immigration, which goes to what Secretary of State Rubio said. You know what? You lied to us. You're out. It's that simple. I love that, by the way.
That's correct. Look, the Supreme Court has already considered the Alien Enemies Act. They did it in 1948. When Harry Truman invoked it, not in a time of war, but after World War II, all the way through from 1945 to 1951. The Supreme Court, Ludke versus Watkins, seminal case, said some very important things. They said, first of all, it's a completely constitutional law. Second of all, they said, this is the law of the land and it must be followed. And finally, even more importantly, they said, judges have no business being involved in second-guessing a presidential decision based on the Alien Enemies Act. And so Judge Boasman is duty-bound to follow Supreme Court precedent, and yet he appears to have ignored it. Several things about his ruling over the weekend, issuing a temporary restraining order, are so troubling to me. First of all, he issued the ruling without hearing from the government, not allowing them to respond. Second of all, the plaintiffs, the members of this gang, 5 of them, are down in Texas. A Washington, D.C. judge doesn't have jurisdiction over them.
And what kind of standing would they have anyway?
No, they really wouldn't.
Seriously?
They wouldn't, because
they're in jail, is that right?
Their exclusive remedy under the act is a habeas corpus petition. That's all. Not a temporary restraining order. Yet Boasman issued a TRO.
Wow. Wow. Kerri Urbahn, can I go to the bigger picture here? And that is more restraining orders, more national injunctions, if you will, have been issued in the past month and during Joe Biden's entire first term. How can judges in one district say this is the law or this is not the law or the president is enjoined. The president, correct me if I'm wrong, Kerri, the president was elected by all the voters in the country. These judges, first of all, were not elected by anybody, but second of all, they don't represent the country. So I don't understand that. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just trying to use some common sense here. And I'll bet you a lot of people out there using the same common sense.
I think that's right. I don't think you need to be a lawyer to look at the use of nationwide injunctions and say, okay, we have a problem here. You know, if you look at the 20th century, only 27 nationwide injunctions were issued over the entire century. Oh. That's over 100 years. Oh. In the first Trump presidency, there were somewhere between 55 and 64 just against him, which was far beyond any of the administrations before him. And then, of course, you just talked about the numbers that we're dealing with right now. But yes, Larry, your point is a great one. We have a real separation of powers issue here. We have Article 2, we have Article 3 for a reason. And, you know, another thing that I keep hearing people say is, why do they have to, invoke this old law? Well, first of all, the Constitution, as Tom Homan pointed out, is even older than this particular act. But secondly, when you talk about the unprecedented or the rare nature, rather, of invoking this, it's not unprecedented, but it's rare. Well, let's talk about why we're here. You know, Tren de Aragua wasn't even an issue when I was at DOJ. When you and I were in the Trump administration, MS-13 was, but Tren de Aragua was not. You know when it became an issue? In 21 and 22. What does that correspond to? When Joe Biden opened the borders to terrorists, to gang members, and to criminals. And we can look at the data, it's there. So what the Trump administration is trying to do now is fix a really serious problem by invoking a law on the books. And by the way, they said over the weekend that if they don't get help from the appeals court on this, they're going to go forward using other authority. That's not this act. So we'll see how that all shakes out.
Interesting. Greg, last point here. Some of these district judges have prevented Elon Musk, Trump executive orders. They have prevented not just a freeze on funding, a temporary freeze on funding, but that whole funding process. I just want to raise this because it's an economic point, it's an important point. That funding freeze is to then generate a review, not necessarily budget cuts, but merely a review. Now, how can some federal judge, some district in this country, stop the president of the United States from reviewing the machinations of his own government?
They can't. It's, the president under Article 2 has vested power to run and direct the executive branch. He can hire and fire. He can make cuts. He can pull back expenditures. That is his complete and utter discretion. What you have here are too many people, Democrats and other left-leaning organizations, who are engaging in forum shopping. They're running and sprinting to the nearest favorable judge in a preferable jurisdiction, regardless of whether that judge has any authority whatsoever. And they're getting favorable decisions. People seem to think, well, that's the final word. No, it's not. I guarantee you that most of these decisions by the favorable judge are going to get overturned on appeal. Some of them, I hope, go to the United States Supreme Court to finally settle the issue. But there's too many judges who are making decisions not based on the law, but on their political opinions and their personal animus against Donald Trump.
Coincidentally, I don't know, probably 95% of them are appointed by Obama and Biden. I'm just going to guess.
Well, a substantial number of them have been because it was forum shopping by the litigants.
Okay, I'll hedge. Substantial number.
Yeah.
Greg Jarrett is right. Kerri, Urbahn, terrific stuff wherever you may be. We appreciate you very, very much. Thanks to both of you.